welcome to this week's program. We're going to be talking about irrigation. We're also going to be talking about economics and a bit of security to see if you can make sure that you know where your machinery is. But in just a moment, it's farm accounting. Kerry, this business about records and the cloud.
Yes, it's the way that accounting's moving, and we've just had a major bank in New Zealand actually take a 17% stake in a cloud accounting provider. So that's a big vote of confidence for that provider.
Tell me about the cloud, because I'm over 65.
Basically, it's like storage on a server somewhere in the world. So you've got 3 or 4 servers that all sort of connect to each other, and all your data sits there rather than on your own computer at home.
So this is like backing up.
Yeah, it's sort of, but it's actually stored elsewhere. So you don't do anything on your computer. You just go onto the internet, and it's all done on their server. Your computer just is a sort of like a portal really into that world.
First thing that comes to my mind is security, or access being gained by people who shouldn't.
Yeah, that's very, very low risk. They've got a lot of security behind it. It gets tested all the time. You know, it's really well locked down. It would take a very, very clever hacker to get in there.
Yeah.
And then what they get may be useless anyway.
So, but you're able to retrieve it?
Yeah, we can, if it's in the cloud, so we can sit in our office and the farmer can sit on their farm, the bank can sit at the bank, and we can all work together and just look at the same data at the same time. So you don't have to try and arrange everyone to get on the farm or into an office together. You can all just sit there on the phone and conference call and look at the same data. It's a great thing.
Yes, I mean, we have actually come a long way since you started in it as a chartered accountant even.
Oh yeah, it's a big difference now. We can do a lot more than what we used to, especially with this sort of solution. And you know, if the farmers run their own software in the cloud and they make a mistake, instead of us having to go out to them or them come in with their laptop, computer, whatever, they just ring us up and we can deal with it on the phone there and then.
Are you putting budgets and that sort of things through there?
Yep, you can do budgets. This solution that the bank's invested in is a real-time financial modeller. So you can get in there and forecast what your results are going to be based on the past, etc. So there's a lot of solutions like that, and it's brilliant. It gives us an opportunity to actually see what's going on.
Now that leads me straight into records and how important records are.
Yes. Now for most farmers, they probably just keep them for tax. But in the current climate, we're talking to a lot of ours and saying, look, is that really the only need now? Or should you be looking at actually going to the decision-making type model where you're keeping them to see where you're at and where you're actually heading? A lot of them just sort of throw them in a box or a file, bring it in and then find out what the results are at the end of the tax year. But with prices, etc., then you need to get ahead. So we're saying, right, let's tidy out your records, work out what you need, and get some systems in place.
I suppose with modern computers and all that sort of thing, you can change a budget, for example, daily if you need to, depending on the amount of grain or milk or meat and the prices
yeah,
thereof.
You do, and we actually doing monthly meetings with a few of our farmers, and we're changing it like that. So we're saying, right, where you're at now, is this still going to be where you're going to be in the future? And we just adapt the figures to suit where they're heading. So if we make a decision and it's going to completely change the way the farm was operating, then we'll budget that in and take out the old costs and put the new in, etc. So it's quite a fluid sort of thing. You can't stick to a rigid budget, especially if you're making decisions in the direction that you're heading.
And we've talked about it before, but your budget should reflect the reality, not what you'd hope for.
Most definitely, yeah. If we have a farmer that comes to us and he says, this is what I think I'm doing, and he's never ever done it in the past, we're going to have a serious conversation, say, look, you've never done it. What makes you think you're going to do it now? Let's look at what you really are achieving and start at there as sort of a point. We can have this as a dream, but it's not the reality.
It's like selling a bottle of wine for what it owes you, not what it's worth.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
With these budgets, though, it's a case of watching very, very closely. I mean, a lot of guys have lost a whole lot of grass seed, for example.
Yep, you should be at least monthly sitting down and looking at what you actually were compared to your budget and seeing where the differences are. Those differences are the things you've got to investigate. So if you're well over budget on an expense, for example, you've got to see why. Get in there and see if there's a reason why. Is it just because you got out of control and started spending, or was there an actual need for it? So yeah, and that's the sort of process we're going through at the moment. We're saying, right, let's look at every line of the budget, where you're at, how far over or under you are.
And you guys do graphs for people, don't you?
Yeah, we graph all sorts of things for them. So we can graph exactly where their income's heading, where and what the budget will be. Bank balances, for example, we're graphing that for them because that's quite a good way to present where they're going to end up. Because you have your high and low points, and so we're looking to see where those low points are and how low they actually are, because that can be quite a costly point if you get well into overdraft.
IRD, they do pop in.
Yes, they do.
And you've got a few things, because they only pop in if there's a bit of smoke, don't they?
Yeah, they do. So there's a few things you can do to sort of stop them coming in. The first thing is actually declare all your income.
Yeah, well, that's an obvious.
Yeah, you'd think so, but there's things like, you kill livestock on the farm for your own consumption. No one ever puts, or very few put that down as an income item, but it has to be down.
Because it's an expense that's been saved.
It's a personal, so you've killed an animal to eat personally, so that's something the farm's missed out on, so you've got to compensate the system for it effectively.
Whew,
Yeah,
that's a bit scary.
Yeah, but if you're killing 20, 30 animals a year,
Oh yeah,
it adds up pretty quick.
That's more than Yoni's disease, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the first one. The second one is actually keep your receipts.
Yep.
If IRD do come knocking, it's on you to prove that you had a valid expense and it was deductible. They can turn around and say, no, it's not. And if you haven't got a receipt, well, you're on pretty thin ice to actually make it claimable.
Yep.
So.
And all these different things, I mean, a jet boat is not a pump. Well, it is, but it's not.
No, it's definitely not, but people still try it. And, swimming pools are not there for firefighting protection. These are sort of arguments you get. So that's one of the things you've got to watch, is actually make sure you're not going over the top with what you're claiming. There is some grey areas, but don't go outside those. If you start arguing your jet boat or your pool, you are liable to sort of drag attention to yourself.
And we keep saying, don't we, so regularly that IRD aren't fools, and they know basically what returns and margins anybody in business should be.
Any business they know about. For farmers, they know when the high and low years are. So if a lot of farmers are sort of having for example, a high point, and you're reporting losses, there'll be questions on your file as to why, because that would be outside the norm.
And as you said, if 30 sheep die with a knife rather than of natural causes, they're going to be onto that as well.
Exactly, yeah, and it stands out because when we do our end-of-year livestock reconciliations, we've got to make these adjustments to deaths and killed, etc. So you can't just hide it. It does come out in the wash.
Big advice: talk to your chartered accountant.
Most definitely, yep. If you're uncertain on anything, that's your first port of call.
And even if you do think you're okay, still double check.
Yes.
Indeed, Kerry, thank you very much indeed. Now, security of one's assets is very, very important. In just a moment, we find out what can help you keep yours that you own. Craig, farm security with respect to vehicles and assets is becoming very important.
Yeah, very definitely. I think it's like any business. When you've got a lot of gear out and about and personnel and those sort of things, you're paid to protect them, and the only way you can protect them is by locking away securely, and unfortunately farms you can't lock everything away, so it's a matter of putting some other safeguards on those vehicles, etc., or plants, so that you can sort of track them or keep an eye on them to stop people from stealing them, or if they do steal them, making that recovery process that much easier.
Because farmers are notorious for not turning a key because they've got to turn it again in the morning.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, I mean, it comes down to making sure that you're being aware of the fact that people are starting to remove equipment, whether you leave it lying around or whether even if you lock it away, a padlock's only going to keep an honest person out. Some of these guys, if they're that hell-bent on flogging stuff, they'll flog it anyway. It's a matter of trying to track it and make sure that it's retrievable.
So, what are the options? What's available?
Well, fairly basic. You can go for a unit like this particular little one here, which is a Spock tracker. They're about price point of about 220 plus GST and about $150 per year to actually run that unit. And the beauty of that is it can hide away in any particular position on the vehicle itself. It can either be run by four AAA batteries inside it. And if that has a movement alert, so if somebody hops into the vehicle and moves that, you will get a ping through to the PC, and you can even set it up onto your mobile phone if you're in coverage, etc., to track that. So if that was stolen off-site, retrospectively you could go into the system and you could see where that particular vehicle is because of the update that's coming off this unit, which, as you can see by the size of it, is relatively easy to hide on a vehicle, even a quad bike.
So we're talking four-wheel motorbikes, utes, tractors, cars.
If you had a portable generator on site, etc., you could stick one of those on the portable generator, and that would then give you the information as well. And you can list them as the type of product that it is. You can actually name them, what you want to call them, etc., and it will give you an update on movement.
So somebody turns up to your property with a van and loads your four-wheel motorbike into the back of it. You can actually know where it's gone, and the police can turn up and go, hello, hello, hello.
Yes, exactly, and it requires to be able to see the sky, so whilst it's in the van itself, chances are it won't be being pinged, but as soon as they unload it and it's out in the open, etc., it will show where that unit is.
GPS is vital.
Well, GPS is not just about policing staff members and those sort of things. We've gone we've gone way past that now, because this is more of an asset tracker. And then when you can move into farms like any other business, trucking firms and those sort of things, because you've got requirements for occupational safety and health, plus also knowing as a manager of the farm you're responsible for each and every person that's on that farm, and knowing that they're back and they're safe, or where they are on the farm, or if they have an accident and they call up, hopefully on an RT, you'll be in a situation where you'll know where they are, so you can converge on that spot to make sure that you get there to assist them as quickly as possible.
That brings us into the subject of two-way radios, or walkie-talkies as we used to call them.
Well, I mean, obviously at Te Ao Park Limited, that's a pivotal part of our business. It's the hub of what we do. I've been working here for 23 years, and that's all I've done the whole time I've been here effectively, is two-way radio. Motorola, as far as our main supplier of product, etc., we're definitely at the quality end of the spectrum. But as far as the radios are concerned, they're able to, depending on the network that you're on, they're able to give GPS, they're able to give information, let alone the communications that it provides on the farm for efficiency, etc. So, there's a lot of pluses in that area.
So there's still research and development going on?
Oh, very definitely. Now that we've gone into the digital phase of radio, we're now able to get into IP so that they can connect into computer systems. We can talk from Canterbury to another country if we want to.
Through a two-way radio?
Through a two-way radio. Through the network, because as soon as they're on IP, of course, you get into the internet, and we can feed the audio in at this end and it comes out at the other end, whether it be across onto a computer or across onto another radio. So, yes.
Now, I'm well over 19. Is it too hard for somebody who's carrying a gold card to actually understand all this?
Well, the complexity of the systems and the networks that they operate on is where we come in. We take the pain out of the connectivity, and for the end users concerned, as far as their operations concerned, they press the button and they talk, and that information can go wherever they wish it to go. I think if you've got a cell phone, a smartphone or something like that, where there are applications where you can dial in, you could be sitting on the beach in Fiji and still check or call into the farm if you wanted to, using the Wi-Fi across the internet and back into the radio system if that's the way that it's set up. So this being isolated to just coverage of 10 k's from the farm, etc., on a set repeater is now long gone. You can have a manager in Christchurch and still talk to a farm in Ashburton if that's the case.
So it's a case of not knowing, or not needing to know how it works, just knowing that it does work.
Exactly, and I think that's what we've got to get our head around, is the fact that investing in the technology is not necessarily knowing how it works, other than a very broad brushstroke. It's a matter of actually having the ability to understand that when you press the button, it's going to come out the other end, whether that be on the farm or whether that be within the coverage that you require, which could be Ashburton to Christchurch or North Canterbury, whatever you want.
Or international.
Or international, if that's what you want.
I'm afraid it is a reality. After the break, though, we're going to be talking about research that's being done at Lincoln University.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Welcome back to On the Land. In just a moment, we'll be looking at the serious situation called spray drift. Lincoln Agritech, who are you and what do you do?
We are here on the campus of Lincoln University, but actually we are in one of the labs from Lincoln Agritech. Lincoln Agritech is a, I think, very unique company because we do very interesting projects around research and development for innovations, high-tech innovations for the primary industries. And we have researchers here, scientists, excellent scientists, smart engineers, and a lot of good technicians and administrative staff that help us to work in different projects for the primary industry, providing new sensors that help us to measure the environment or the actions on a farm, that helps the farmer or the consultant to make better decisions and later on also to improve productivity. So we are a company that is also doing research with national funds. So we compete with other organizations, but we are independent and we are privately organized. One of the teams here in Lincoln Agritech, almost 15 years ago, they started to look into a very specific problem in agriculture, a problem that is worldwide a problem, but with some special issues in New Zealand. And this is the movement of spray beyond the target, beyond the field that you want to spray, beyond the orchard, beyond the vine row that you want to spray. And this is the movement of droplets from that spray into, let's say, the neighboring environment. The droplets drift away, and this is the spray drift, and this can cause serious problems. A nice example of drift is actually at home. When somebody uses a perfume, you might, in a few seconds later, smell it in the next room. So it happens that also the movement in the house carries some of these droplets to the next place. And this happens also when we apply agricultural chemistries. The problem with agricultural chemistries, of course, they may also smell a little bit, hopefully not too bad, but in most cases they can also cause severe damages. They have an intention why farmers are spraying these agrochemicals, and therefore we can also cause effects somewhere else. We have 4 different possibilities that a spray can damage when it goes beyond the target, beyond the field, beyond the orchard. The first, of course, we lose spray. The amount of spray that the farmer has to apply is more because he loses some, and this is an economic loss. The next point, and this is more to the neighbors of that farmer, if you spray a chemical that drifts to some other areas, some other crops, this crop may be very sensitive to that spray. For instance, if you spray a herbicide on a paddock where you want to control weeds, this herbicide may really damage a vine row close by or that drifts into that area. And the same can happen with other crops. When you apply agrochemical, it can damage some other crop because the other crop is more sensitive to that. And it happens, and we have messages from wine growers here in New Zealand that claim several $100,000 of damage because some of their neighbors applied a herbicide to a paddock, and this spray drift then damaged that large vineyards. And it happens again and again, so we need to work around that problem and help farmers to get out of these problems. The second problem is also a damage to the neighbor. Some of the herbicides or some of the pesticides actually are registered, of course, to certain crops. Let's say a certain fruit crop, and when the drift from that, say, insecticide to kill some insects moves to the neighboring crop where this pesticide is not registered, you may have a problem in the importing country because they say you have some residues on your grapes or your kiwi fruits or your apples that is not allowed, but it came from some other crops. So we have damages that are very severe damages to some of the growers. The fourth example that we see with drift is when you have some organic growers that don't use synthetic pesticides. They, of course, don't want that a drift damages their crop or that some residues show up in their products. So we have problems that we want to tackle, and New Zealand has some specific issues with this. We have hedgerows or windbreaks. We have a high percentage of high value crops like fruits and vegetables. So spraying is a very, very important part of what is going on in New Zealand. And therefore, this country also subsidized research in the last 6 years to really find out what is happening when you have drift. What are the influencing, we call it driving forces. For instance, wind speed, wind direction, the shelter belt, how much can the shelter belt eventually really filter from that spray. And all this needs some research. And these kind of data are not available worldwide because not many other countries have, for instance, windbreaks or these kind of hedgerows. So we need to do this kind of research in New Zealand, and this was done with the MBRE project in the last 6 years. And we are happy that we are able to talk about that with you, with the growers, with the farmers, consultants. This was a project done by several other partners, Scion, the forestry research center in Rotorua, because they also have issues with spray and spray drift also in forestry. We work with a small company in Rotorua that looks for the pesticides on the leaves. Plant Protection Chemistry in New Zealand is a company. And we work with University of Otago because they look into a very specific problem of spray drift that I can talk about eventually later if you like.
What are you doing with the stuff behind us here?
This is our working lab, is the spray bench. This white object that you see at the right is a system that measures the size and the speed, how fast droplets move. And of course also we can measure the volume of the spray. This is a unique system, and eventually later Scott Post, our colleague from the United States, can explain how this works. It just measures very, very accurate the size, the droplet speed, and the volume of the spray. To the left you see a system that Rory Roten can explain to you, where we show farmers how you can reduce the risk of drift. We cannot go to zero, we will always have some drift. Drift is what happens when you spray, so we can only reduce the amount of drift. And we can show here if you spray less to some parts in the vineyard or in a crop where you don't have leaves or only a few leaves, then of course you reduce the amount of spray because you don't need to spray a gap between plants. So it's possible to reduce the amount of spray that we apply. And then of course we can also reduce the risk that it drifts. This is what we like to show here. The physics of spray and spray drift is very, very difficult because we have a phenomenon that is very important to understand. The best would be large droplets. Large droplets have the tendency just to drop down because they are heavy. But when you have a lot of large droplets, when you put them onto a leaf, they roll down. They don't touch or adhere to the leaves very easily. So the best would be have small droplets, many, many small droplets, because then they can attach easily to the leaf. The problem is small droplets are lighter, so they can really travel very easily. They can sail with the wind, and like I said with the example in the house, you always have windy conditions. You don't have standstill of air movement, and this is a very difficult problem, of course, for New Zealand. You have almost every day, everywhere, windy conditions. So the farmers need to find out when they can apply the pesticide, when they can spray in situations where you have low wind speeds and eventually just no wind at all. So this is a problem that we need to find out. How can we change the spectrum of droplet size so that we avoid this drift? The best of what the farmer can do is really have his sprayer calibrated so that we know it's the right pressure, it's the right size of the nozzles, and very important is that the nozzles are not worn out. The good farmers do this on a regular basis, once a year, twice a year, eventually every second year. Those farmers that don't do that, they have a problem because some of them, they just bought the sprayer 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and they don't expect that something changes, but there's a lot of change. The nozzles wear out, we have pressure changes in the pumps, the pressure changes, so we are sure that there is a change in the quality of the spray. So the first thing is calibrate your sprayer, check it regularly. And the next thing is, of course, to talk with people that have experience what to do in spraying. So we have organizations like GrowSafe in New Zealand, or the levy-paid organization that support farmers, Hort NZ, FAR. They all know what to do to have a perfect spraying set up for your conditions so that the farmers really can avoid this problem of drift, either the losses for himself or the risk for his neighbors.
What's happening internationally?
Internationally, everybody realizes drift is part of spraying. And as long as we cannot avoid that we need to spray, because this is the way how we apply agrochemicals to protect our crops, we have to accept that there is some spray. We need to reduce it. So most of the agencies that register pesticides, or the authorities like the EPA in the United States, also New Zealand, they say we don't want to force you to have no drift. Let's talk about drift reduction technologies or procedures how to reduce drift. So this is a very important target for all of these organizations in New Zealand and internationally overseas, just to show what is possible to have less drift going around. We also see more and more evidence that we don't need only to talk about the droplets that are drifting away. We also need to accept that some of the active ingredients that we spray, the chemicals that we want to use to protect a crop, can also evaporate into the air as a vapor, as a gas. And this gas, of course, can also travel with air. And when it travels much further than just the droplets, because vapor is almost weightless for the air, then you have, of course, very large distances where this vapor can later on condense and become a droplet when it gets colder and the vapor cools down and it drops down somewhere on other crops or somewhere in other environments, for instance in reserves, in natural reserves, where you probably are really curious and very sensitive about using pesticides, or they should not arrive there. So drift reduction technologies, vapor drift, long distance traveling of agricultural chemicals, and the next step is that companies that produce sprayers now look into new technologies to monitor what happens in that procedure of spraying. The best is, and we are working on that in our own group here, to have a sensor or several sensors that measures the drift on the go, so that the tractor driver, the contractor, knows you have a problem and can either change pressure on the sprayer or even stop spraying if it's too big a problem that spray happens. So the spraying companies want to improve their own gear just by improving the spraying quality on the boom and measure the way how drift is going on in the environment.
And after the break, it's irrigation with Tony Davoren.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Tony, just back from the field days, how did it go down there?
Yeah, the field days were pretty good. I mean, for Southland, we had four absolutely glorious days. I mean, it rained a little bit on the Tuesday when we were setting up. It cleared up in the afternoon and we had sunshine. I mean, the experience of going to Southern Field Days is that you generally get one mud day.
Yep.
No mud days. Southland, like a lot of the other parts of New Zealand, is you could say it's probably in need of a little bit of rain. They're on, most of the people down there that we spoke with are on irrigation restrictions because they're all connected to the rivers. And probably, because of the dairy, I guess, it was a pretty subdued field day. There were people around, but not busting the wallets out, and there certainly went piles of $20 notes flying around. But very subdued. This is one of the years, and next year we'll look forward to next year.
Well, they're planning ahead as well, aren't they? They'll be looking at gear and saying, well, not this year, I can't justify it, but next year, make sure you got one in the yard.
Yeah, so Southern Field Days were very good. I mean, we had a very good Southern Field Days. Yep.
You've been saying for ages, and people have been going, Tony, Davoren, you've got to be joking, it's all over, but it's not.
No, it is not all over. I mean, if you go into, for example, some of the areas that, around that sort of 21st, 22nd of January, got really good rainfalls in that southern part of Canterbury, parts of the North Island. I mean, Hawke's Bay had some really good rainfalls. You go back to those areas now and they'll be going, where did that rain go? And it has gone. I mean, if you look at the weather we've had, particularly the last 2 weeks, it's been a little bit overcast occasionally, but we have had some very hot days. And that's pretty typical of when we get into that middle part of February, particularly, or the latter half of January, middle half of February. Right now we have the peak solar radiation coming in. I mean, that's just the way solar radiation works. It lags behind the longest day by about 4 to 5 weeks. And we're 4 to 5 weeks past the longest day, and so we're getting the hottest temperatures, clear skies, lots of solar radiation, and everything is just smoking along.
The crops are looking great now.
Oh, well, you go and talk to the arable farmers right now. Maybe 2 weeks ago they might have been looking
the bit of grass that had been cut.
It had been sitting on the ground. They get rain on it, but now they're flat into harvest. They're just knocking stuff over left, right, and centre. Grain moistures are fine. Not a lot of drying will have to take place this year. We've got great harvest weather at the moment, and baling weather, of course. They can harvest, bale, paddocks clean. So from that point of view, there's always a silver lining for somebody and a less silver lining for the others. So anybody that's pastoral in particular or not in the harvest mode, they've certainly got to be irrigating flat out really at the moment. There's no respite. There really isn't any respite in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I don't think.
And there's still water under there, though?
Yeah, there is still water. We've still got water. Look, I haven't looked at any of the rivers or anything, but either in the North Island or the South Island, but groundwater's not a problem in both the North Island and here, particularly the Hawke's Bay area, and up through the Matamata area into Pukekohe. They're fine. There's groundwater available. It's just, when it doesn't rain, then the rivers end up not being able to supply us with all the water we need.
And of course, we've still got quite a long way for the pastoral guys.
Yes, we do. I mean, we're still looking at potentially another 2 months of irrigation. We're halfway through February. We've got to get to the middle part of April before we're really getting into that time of the year when you can start really think about, well, I'm going to skip a few. I'm only going to irrigate once this week with a pivot, for example. Might just lengthen my round with the other irrigators. But we've still got another 2 solid months ahead of us.
But those dews aren't doing anything, are they?
No. I mean, the thing about the dews is if you've got a dew, it's no longer on your boots, when you walk through it, the benefit of the dew's gone. Now, the benefit of the dews is at the moment here is gone by about 9 o'clock in the morning. So we've got a very long period during the day when things are growing flat out, transpiring flat out, and still using lots of water. So, you know, we're not getting a lot of benefit out of the dews. When your boots are still wet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then you're starting to get some real benefit out of the dews.
So check the boot.
Yeah. It's not an old wives' tale, but it's a really good indicator that there's moisture around that can be evaporated and do what you need from the transpiration process.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So as far as crops are concerned, the pressure's obviously off now.
Yeah, pretty much the pressure's off for the crops. I mean, we've still got a lot of stuff like maize and some of the carrot seed and some of the radish seed that's still ticking along. And they'll be starting to think about getting paddocks ready again for next seasons. You know, the likes of ryegrass and clover will start going back into the ground shortly. So they'll be preparing some of those paddocks, and they'll use some irrigation to get the seed bed right, get it up, get it struck, irrigate it again to take it into the winter. Yeah.
I suppose people are direct drilling too to conserve moisture.
Yeah, there is more direct drilling or
minimal cultivation, or whatever the
minimal
present
cultivation.
term is.
Yeah, there is a lot more of that being done, but you know a lot of it you've still got to incorporate that stubble at the top or anything that's on the top, just to make sure that not bury it, but just incorporate it so that it starts to break down and go from residue into organic matter. So
are you surprised that we've got through as well as we have?
Yeah, I am relatively surprised. I think the fact that if we hadn't had the rainfalls we got in January, we would be in a much more serious or much more limited situation than we are right now. We were very fortunate to get bits and pieces of rain around New Year, about the 2nd or 3rd of January, all across both North Island, South Island. And then we got another, in the South Island, we got another rainfall around that 21st, 22nd of January. North Island got some the week before that. They had that, I can't remember the name of the storm, I think it was Roy.
Whatever it was.
Whatever it was, but they kept getting dribs and drabs of rain, which hung around in January, but it's gone. The last part of January and February now, it's gone. So we've had 3 weeks now of pretty intense water use. And we're back where we were pre-Christmas.
Yeah, and that's going to hang around. It's going to be around.
It's going to be around for a while. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so no relenting, keep going.
And you were saying anything about the autumn and winter?
I've been a bit silent lately, really. Haven't heard anything from them. But certainly, I mean, the last time I looked at the indicators for El Nino, they had all strengthened again. So we'd gone into a bit of a waning pattern, but the pressures, the temperatures, the Southern Oscillation Index were all pointing to it strengthening up again going into the autumn.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. Now we're talking about liquids, obviously. In just a moment we're going to be talking about the latest in tanks. Fill wine and a water tank.
Well, not necessarily water, but wine tanks. Absolutely, Rob. Obviously, El Nino at the moment, very dry conditions. My guess is we're going to have a very good grape harvest this year. And one of the things that we've been looking at as a company at is wine storage and fermentation vessels, which we've done some of that for a number of years. But now we've launched into, obviously you can see on the tank behind us, it has quite a high upstand for the manhole. That then means that we can evacuate oxygen out of the tank, which is very important in producing a very clean wine from the grape that is harvested. So we've worked very hard on that, and we can now put manholes into the side of tanks and the appropriate stainless steel connections and stuff onto the tanks as well.
But it's still one of your water tanks or the system.
Yeah, that's the great thing about rotational moulding, isn't it? You can take a mould that produces a particular shape, and then you can increase the wall section to make it heavier, to take a higher SG or specific gravity material. So there are lots of possibilities once you've actually made a rotational mould.
Yeah, durability?
Absolutely. Polyethylene is no taint, so it won't taint the wine in any way. And in fact, obviously, internationally, there's a lot of polyethylene now used in the wine industry. the effect of that is that it's much less expensive to produce polyethylene than it is stainless steel, so we can produce a much better result along the way.
I was going to ask you about price because stainless steel is deadly expensive.
Yeah, and in actual fact over the last few years it's got alarmingly so. The companies up in Marlborough and Seddon area, obviously with the earthquake that they had, they found some of the deficiencies of stainless steel too, with the legs of tanks suddenly moving horizontally at some force.
You don't want them to tuck under, do you?
No, and what's happened is they've actually destroyed the tanks, and they're very expensive to fabricate.
And hard to come by?
There's a limited number of companies in New Zealand that can manufacture stainless steel for the wine industry, so it's put a lot of pressure on those businesses.
Now you've got special couplings obviously for the wine tanks. Do we need to order in advance?
Absolutely, and this is why we're talking about this now and not in May when or April when it's all happening. You know, we need to get goods in from overseas, especially the stainless steel stuff that we don't have on stock. So I'd urge everybody to get their order in soon so that we can actually make provision for it.
Now, we talked a wee bit about price. Is it fair to say that these are probably less than half the price of a stainless one?
At a guess, something like less than half the cost of stainless steel, which is significant when you're trying to set up a winery or, in fact, endeavouring to make good wine. You really want to have that product in place at the right time.
And if you're going to put them outside, which a lot of the vineyards will, can you tie them down?
Absolutely, and in fact in these tanks you can see behind us we also have seismic restraints. We have that for more of the chemical stuff that we do with our tanks. We do a lot in the chemical industry where we're dealing with sodium chloride and other products that are stored in polyethylene. We have seismic restraints, but even the tie-down lugs that we've got at the top, it's possible to actually attach that to the ground reasonably easily.
Because when they don't have any wine in them, they become quite light.
They'll get a fair bit lighter, yeah, and actually when they're full of wine they're going to be quite heavy, so they'll be less likely to shift. But essentially if you have seismic shifting of the ground, the tank made of polyethylene is essentially a big bladder, so it takes it in an elastic way and deals with that, and actually during the earthquakes we had no major damage.
So what about cleaning?
Polyethylene is just one of those materials where it's very tolerant of chemicals. You think about a lot of the tanks that are used in other industries. Polyethylene is very inert. It doesn't tend to get crusts of other things joining on it because it's just inert.
So now wine is another add-on for all your other tanks like milk and colostrum and all those other things that you guys provide tanks for.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, we do molasses tanks, we do colostrum tanks as you've mentioned. We do a large number of other materials into polyethylene. It's an engineering material and we're using it for this purpose.
In just a moment we'll be back talking to John Walley.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good. You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
John, base erosion and profit shifting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hey, sounds really complicated, but it's about making money in one place and paying less tax in another. So, if you're a business that's operating, let's say in the UK, let's say Facebook is huge. It paid last year something like $4,500 worth of tax. So the British Exchequer looks at that and says, we thought we'd get more than that.
And rightly so.
And probably true. Google have just done a deal with Her Majesty's Inspectors of Taxes, and they've agreed on $130 million for the past 10 years. Now that sounds a lot of money.
Not over 10 years.
Yeah, but when you think they did $4.5 billion turnover last year, and $4.5 billion, if you sort of wind that back and say they did 10% on sales, that's $500 million. And if they did $500 million, they ought to be paying in 1 year alone a couple of $100 million. So the 10-year deal is not a bad deal, but that really means that these bigger businesses that can play games across national boundaries can shift profits about. So you know, you put your head office in Ireland, and the branch office in the UK has to pay management fees to the head office in Ireland, which lowers the UK profit and makes the profit in Ireland, which is a lot lower in terms of corporate tax than it is in the UK. And so people get a bit crinkly mouthed about it, and as businesses globalise, it's getting worse or losing more and more. That's the base erosion as a result of profit shifting. And that's
this is the big corporate stuff, isn't it?
Well, it's big corporate stuff, but it's also cross-international boundary transactions. So you want to buy a dairy farm, can't think why anybody would these days, but you know, you want to buy a dairy farm,
it'll come back.
and you want to buy it from China, and you can borrow money at 1%. You can afford to pay quite a bit more for that bit of dirt than the New Zealander can, who's going to be charged 5, 6, 7% on the same borrowing. And so that international game of where you borrow the money and where you buy the asset becomes something that impacts the tax shifting in the business environment.
Would there be many New Zealanders who are borrowing offshore to get that advantage?
Well, I think there was some offshore borrowing that the ANZ sort of suffered a little bit about a few years ago, and they pushed a lot of that offshore debt into the farming community, and there were some ructions about that at the time. But clearly, if you borrow in US dollars to chase a low interest rate, you run the risk of the exchange rate moving against you when you've done that borrowing. So anybody who's borrowed in US dollars in New Zealand right now is sort of feeling the pressure somewhat, because the currency's in that mid-60s range compared to the high 80s where it was a couple of years ago.
And then there's the futures market, and that's another whole chapter, isn't it?
The futures market for
currency.
For current, well, I mean, that just makes that game much more difficult. And this is the discussion of, is the financial sector a servant of the real sector, or is it playing with itself? And so a lot of this derivative stuff and the futures, is the financial markets playing with the financial markets and hoping when the music stops you're left holding something.
What are the world markets doing, John?
Well, we've had the sell down. There's been a bit of a rally in the past couple of weeks. The low oil price, which we all thought we would like at one time, is sort of indicating that there's not a lot of confidence in the real economy going forward. We've seen the introduction of yet more negative interest rates, which is central banks paying banks or charging banks for having money on deposit, which is a bit of a pain. But we've got now Sweden, Switzerland, Holland, Japan from memory, were all in this negative interest rate area. And that's the problem, is when we went with the quantitative easing and whatever you call it, printing money, that was the central banks trying to stimulate economies. Well, when your interest rates are very low, a cut in the interest rate from 7/10 of bugger all to 8/10 of bugger all really doesn't make any difference.
It's still bugger all.
It's still bugger all. And so they need to do more, but they were pushing that money into the banking sector, and it showed itself in asset markets. Houses, we all know about Auckland, equities, stock market booms, and we've seen some of that now unwinding. And the worry is, what do you do next? If the real economy doesn't fire, demand doesn't move, we've now got this output gap, i.e. that we've got more capacity in the economy than it's actually demanded in terms of consumption, and we end up in this sort of slowdown generally. And confidence ebbs, and confidence ebbs tends to push that process. So right now it's on the cusp. It could go either way. Over the past week things have improved a bit, and hopefully they'll continue to improve until we have the next nightmare.
Exactly. So New Zealand, I mean, you've trickled into New Zealand.
Yeah, New Zealand's that. It's still a worry in terms of the dairy payout. I mean, New Zealand dairy farming is critical to New Zealand. We all know that. And the lower for longer in terms of the payout is tending to what's coming through the numbers now. Futures market for milk suggests that the auction overnight tonight will come back again. We'll wait and see what the morning brings, but you know, another 10% down simply reinforces that lower for longer in terms of the payout.
So the currency, though, that's helping.
It's helping a bit. We've been into 64. We're currently about 66 and a bit. You know me, I'd like it lower for longer in terms of currency.
You'd like it in the old days of the 40s and 50s.
Well, I mean, that's probably not realistic, but I'd certainly like to see low 60s, high 50s. And that's good for my businesses that are exporting. But that said, you know, where we are now is a damn sight better than it was when we were in the 80s.
Reserve Bank, what are they expecting or chasing or doing?
Yeah, the Reserve Bank's sort of feeling the pressure. It's built its world around chasing inflation, and they're looking everywhere for it and can't find anything.
It's looking under the chairs.
And they can just search around for inflation and can't find it, so we just have to sort of change the measure. We won't use headline, we'll use core inflation. There's a bit more core inflation than headline, and we won't count the traded sector because that's deflationary. If we add the traded sector to the internal sector, we actually end up with lower inflation overall. And oh dear, we'd have to cut interest rates. Oh, and if we do that, what happens to the Auckland housing market? So we go back to my long-term position. We need central bank policy that can actually push back on asset markets. Doesn't matter whether it's houses or equities, we need to be able to push back on it, because if I can borrow as much as I'm willing to take on the debt, no limit from the lender's side, and so's anybody else, we're going to compete over that limited asset called real estate. So prices are going to go up because at that part of the market, this competition between people who've got the capacity to borrow, they'll continue to borrow. That pushes prices up.
But the Auckland market is softening.
It's softened of late, but it's softened off a very high level. And let that continue, it would be wonderful. But if the Reserve Bank were to cut interest rates now, how much impact would that have on the softening of the prices? You don't know until you know.
Until you know, exactly. Very briefly, Europe, what's happening there as far as refugees and such?
Well, we've got the talk has sort of slowed down a bit. They are slowly getting their acts together. But end of the Schengen area, you know, forget borderless Europe anymore. It's starting to tighten down. So there'll be border controls between places that in the past you just drove through. Now we're back to the old barriers again that were there sort of pre-98, whenever the Schengen zone came into existence. So we're into that sort of border controls, checking at the borders. Are we going to do this? Are we going to let people in?
So the EU is really confused.
Yeah.
John, thank you very much indeed. Now, if you'd like to go over that interview with John again, just go to our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed the program, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.